Good morning, preppers. How's everybody doing today? We're going to shift gears a little bit in our preps for today. And of course, we normally talk about how to stockpile food and the best tools to use. But today we're going to talk about trends and, of course, using intelligence to see what's coming in the future. Now, don't get hung up about predicting the future. Predicting the future isn't some kind of mystical ball trying to figure out what's going on. It's actually exceedingly simple. Just look at history. History there teaches us certain things. We've seen things happen. Like, for example, even though this is not the only example, like Nazi Germany. And as the Nazis came into power, there were very specific things that actually happened and took place that if we see those same things taking place now, well, guess what? We can probably come to the same conclusion. Especially when you see those specific actions taking place in numerous places around the world that always leads to the same result. So here we are in the modern United States, or the modern first world, if you want to go ahead and put it that way. And there are very specific things that we're seeing taking place now. And of course, next steps that are probably going to happen too, leading to changes that we all don't want. So overall, I'm going to show you 15 different stages that we're looking at that will lead to, well, an economic collapse and turning our country, your country, into something that you do not want. All right, when we actually see the progression, one of the first things you see, and by the way, I'm going to give you the first few. These first few don't always necessarily go in perfect chronological order, but often actually seem intermixed. In fact, that's what we're seeing right now too. So the first one is civil unrest. You see lots of civil unrest, but granted, in the United States, we've seen civil unrest happen for the last couple hundred years in various situations. But again, we're not going just by one thing, we're going by multiple. And then also we see a drastic increase in crime. Have you looked at some of the headlines? Have you looked at some of the statistics about crime since 2020 has just skyrocketed? Of course, that goes hand in hand with certain places defunding the police or making it in the situations where the police can't arrive in certain amount of times because there's not as many police officers, etc. And not to mention, I simply just see in the United States, and you can correct me if you like, just a drastic increase in overall violence and crime anyway. Now, understand, I am not saying any of this isn't orchestrated. That's irrelevant and beside the point right now. I'm just simply saying, let's look at what's happening. What's causing it? That's a whole different video. In fact, that's more of a controversial video. Something else we see, food shortages. And I'll be honest with you, in the last, maybe a couple months, there hasn't been a whole lot of food shortages, but the last couple of years leading to that has been. And I put out many videos and talk about this fall. And continuing into next year, we're going to see some drastic food shortages for the fact that the produce being produced because of lack of nitrogen, the lack of fertilizer, the diesel prices, et cetera, are going to cause some serious problems with food very soon to a grocery store near you. And of course, on top of that, also included with that is widespread inflation. So there's number 4, inflation. And inflation has been going up and up and up, and even putting our country into a recession. And again, that's even if you go by the government's numbers of inflation, which are completely skewed to make it look better. You're in trouble when the government skews the numbers to make it look better, and it still puts us in a recession category. And listen, the rest of the categories we're going to go through, the rest of the different details, even if they don't happen, I've been saying it on this channel, I believe because of history, we're heading at the very least into another Great Depression, or we may call it the Greater Depression or Depression 2.0, whatever you want to call it. It's going to be a lot worse because in this particular type of depression, not only do we have every person living in the United States living more in the lap of luxury and cushiness, being thrust down into a situation where, now they have to basically go with bare minimums, or losing jobs and all these things. So if that does happen, which again, I can't say for sure it will, but I think we're looking at a Great Depression probably by next year. And at the very least, I see these things heading into that direction. All right. Now, because of inflation, what we've always seen is the Federal Reserve will raise interest rates, and they always raise it too late, by the way. It's funny because the feds will say, oh, wow, look, we see inflation coming, so let's sit back and do nothing for the next few months or next year. And then when the inflation does skyrocket, they're like, okay, now let's raise some points to try to curb it. Shouldn't they actually try to get ahead of it? And as inflation goes up more, they raise rates even more. And next thing you know, we're in a big, giant jam. And of course, all of this goes hand in hand. It's not simply just one and then the other, but you actually see the things happening, practically speaking, simultaneously. Number 6, large-scale unemployment. And more specifically, what we're seeing now is it's a really weird term, isn't it? Labor shortage. And that kind of boggles my mind for the fact that where'd all the people go? Where'd all the workers go? And I know there is a huge class of upcoming youngsters, if I want to put it that way. Not all of them, by the way. I have seen some people in their teens and 20s and even the 30s who have incredible work ethics, and I applaud them for that, especially for the fact that, in my opinion, the majority of the peers in that category don't really want to work a job. They don't want to earn a trade or learn some kind of career. They just simply want to float through life and hope everything works okay for them. And that actually, more than anything, scares me. Again, you may disagree on that one, but that's actually just the general gist I'm getting from today's culture growing up. Now, because of the unemployment, because of the inflation, because everything difficult, number 7, businesses close down. And when you actually look at financial analysts, they'll tell you all the time that when it comes to businesses, whenever you have a recession, depression, inflation, all those things, businesses will cave in. And it's sad because, they always talk about owning your own business being the American dream. And I still see right now new businesses popping up. And I want to go in there and say, did you really think this through? Because right now is maybe not the time to try to start a new business, because things are only going to get more difficult because of this. Now, also we see, again, not necessarily in order, but coinciding with all of this is number 8, utility interruptions. And that's we're definitely seeing utility interruptions, aren't we? Of course, everybody talks about the power outages and blackouts in certain areas, which are happening. But how about your cell phone? Have you noticed that your cell phone signal is just plain getting crappy? Ours is, and other people we talk to can say the same thing. But we're definitely seeing some problems with the internet. Our Starlink, which has actually worked very well, we try to go live, it actually constantly has interruptions. And when actually, historically speaking, it's been done very well. So utility interruptions are not only happening now, but are going to drastically increase as well. And that's why I always talk about prepping as far as isn't simply just storing away food, but having alternatives for any type of utilities you are fond of right now. They very well may disappear, at least at the very short terms. Number 9, real estate problems. Of course, we're seeing things shifted into a real estate market. Real estate market is just skyrocketing. Interest rates for real estate is skyrocketing. I haven't checked it recently, but last I saw it was like 6.25, something like that. As people are doing their best to try to get into houses or on land, fleeing the cities is still happening. But because of the interest rates and because of unemployment and such, it's getting more and more difficult. And unfortunately, we're going to see even a more drastic rise in real estate rates, and eventually the whole thing is going to collapse on that as well. We're going to see a lot of people not being able to have houses and such, and renting isn't always the best option. So that goes into number 10. We're going to see a drastic increase in homelessness. And I think we're actually right now between number 9 and 10, heading into number 10 very soon. Now, obviously, we have a lot of homeless problems anyway. Not that they're a problem, but for the fact that there's so many people that don't have homes. Not even talking about veterans or people who basically are on drugs and such, but more and more people are not being able to find places to live and actually have a sustainable lifestyle living in a house. It's amazing in Colorado when they actually legalized marijuana. You would see homeless people, sure you would, but since then you see massive tent cities of people who go there thinking they can take the marijuana and actually still work a job, and they end up being homeless. And of course, homelessness has always been a huge thing. And I feel for a lot of the homeless people because they simply just don't conform to society. But what we're going to see is it's not necessarily people who don't conform to society. We're going to see far more people, just general people like you and I, who do conform to society and actually try to live a good social life, are going to find themselves in situations where they're going to be homeless. And that's actually really dangerous. It's dangerous for them, dangerous for the society overall. Because guess what? The number of houses, the number of apartments, they're not disappearing, but yet homelessness will drastically increase. Because of this, number 11, you're going to see large-scale migrations. Large bands of people moving to different locations, either for the jobs or because it's warmer, or because maybe that state has especially set up soup kitchens, which, maybe not soup kitchens as much anymore as setting up Medicaid. Is it Medicaid or the food stamps? That's what I'm trying to talk about. Making it so they'll actually be able to afford and live by getting food from the government assistance. Because that's the only thing that's going to happen. In the Great Depression, soup kitchens were around where they literally just, volunteers and the government put some money into it and getting soup to hand out to the people. But these migrations, this is one of the things that's really going to boggle my mind and when we're talking about people from the United States. But of course, we see massive amounts of immigrants coming across the border and the migrations happening with that as well. I think we're going to see America changing drastically because of this. Now, also because of unemployment, because of labor shortages, because people are not be paying their taxes and the governments can't afford so many things, we're going to see a decrease in police, a decrease in ambulances, a decrease in their fire departments. They're going to have much tighter budgets and they can't afford certain things. And on top of that, because of the unrest and such, you're going to actually have more calls for the police and ambulances and firefighters. So we're going to be getting in a situation where you can't really depend on calling 911 and actually hoping somebody will arrive. That's a very scary thought, but that's what's coming. That is actually number 12. 3 more to go. Number 13, and this is when we really start hitting bad times. Currency becomes worthless. Now, right now, they are pushing to change our good old greenback American dollars into, not saying I love the American dollar, you know what I'm saying, but into digital currency. It's easier to control. Not for us to control, mind you, but for the Federal Reserve and the government to control. And because of this, understand the Federal Reserve admitted they actually did things that led to the Great Depression in the first place. You know that? They actually admitted that. I think they admitted like, whoops, sorry. But who knows if it was really whoops or sorry. You know, what is it? It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. So I think what happened is they did it on purpose to kind of test some things and it crashed the economy. Well, guess what? They're about to switch things over to digital now. Worldwide, we're about to see things switch over to digital now. And you're not going to say that's not going to have some kind of impact on our currency. And again, we're talking about like when the Nazis were coming to power, it would cost $10,000, something like that for a loaf of bread. Could you imagine that happening here? I hope you can imagine it, because if things continue the way they're going, that's going to happen here. Number 14, martial law and military control, because as things start getting crazily out of control, they'll simply just declare martial law. And a lot of Americans think, well, they'll never do that. You need to look up how many times martial law has already been declared in the first place. It's not like one of those things where it's never happened. It's happened a ridiculous amount of times. Ridiculous amount. So it's not beyond them to easily declare martial law again to try to put things under control. Well, not under control like everything's better, but under control so they can control you. Because all of this is heading into number 15. And number 15 is and should be for you the scariest out of all, dramatic change in political structure. Because whenever you see a collapse of economy, economically speaking, not only are you going to be thrown into a depression that may last, 5-10 years, but you're often accompanied by a world war, some kind of major war, and then a political shift, turning your country into something you don't recognize, turning your country into something you don't want, that you didn't vote for, something that was actually constitutionally stable is now constitutionally abolished. And that's the fear that I have. And it's not even a concern. I say all the time, are you concerned about the stock market? Yeah, I'm concerned, but I'm not fearful. I fear for where our country's heading. And it's not just ours, but many of the first world countries that we see around the world, we're about to see a cataclysmic change where everything crashing all at once, economically speaking. All right, I will be happy as a clam and be the first to admit I was wrong if none of that happens. And I hope it never happens. I truly do. I've always said, at the very least, we're probably looking at heading into a Great Depression. However, if we look at historically speaking, we've already seen the first 8 or 9 of these already in play. It doesn't take much to simply get the last few. And all throughout the world, throughout history, we've seen these same things happen, because you have to understand, historically speaking, and if you don't know this already, let this sink in. Civilizations fail. Period. Civilizations fail. And because in the United States, we actually lived through 200 years, quote unquote, of peace, although we haven't. In our mindset, we have, things are peaceful. I want to go to the movies and eat popcorn, and I want to buy a house and mow my lawn. And people get into this daze of think everything's just going to be fine, and therefore things will never change. I'm sure people in other countries, when things collapsed, said the same thing. So that's why we prep. But you know, it is a fearful thing, but we prep so we don't live in fear, because I don't look at this as a complete just sending everything back to a agrarian society where everything's completely collapsed. I see this changing into a new thing. And whenever there's a new thing, there are new opportunities. You need to keep that in mind. There are always new opportunities. There's always hope. Okay. Not a great topic, not a fun topic by any means, pretty dismal, but I hope at the very least you have a better understanding of what's coming, or how about this, what possibly is coming, what probably is coming. Okay, thanks for watching.